On the morning of July 27, 1909, a passenger named Claude Sawyer boarded a train in Durban, South Africa, and left a ship behind him. He had a ticket, he had a cabin, and he had every reason to stay aboard. But the night before, Sawyer had a dream so violent and so specific that he refused to go back to sleep. A figure appeared holding a sword dripping with blood in one hand and a rag soaked with water in the other. The figure came 3 times. Each time, Sawyer woke certain of one thing: he was not going to die on that ship. He collected his luggage, left the vessel, sent a telegram to his wife that read simply, "Thought Waratah, top heavy." Landed Durban. He boarded a train instead. The ship he left behind was the steamship Waratah. She sailed from Durban that morning with 211 people aboard. She was never seen again. Not a lifeboat, no life jackets, not a single identifiable piece of wreckage, not one body. In 116 years of searching, the ocean has returned nothing. Claude Sawyer was the only passenger who got off. The Waratah was built for the Blue Anchor Line, a British shipping company running passenger and cargo services between England and Australia. She was constructed at the Barclay, Curle and Company shipyard in Glasgow and completed in late 1908. She was 465 feet long, 9,339 gross tons, and capable of carrying over 300 passengers. She was the largest and most expensive ship the Blue Anchor Line had ever built. Their flagship, their future. She made exactly one complete voyage before she disappeared. That first voyage, completed in early 1909, should have established her reputation. Instead, it generated a set of reports that would haunt everything that followed. Multiple passengers wrote letters and filed formal complaints about the ship's behavior in heavy seas. The most detailed came from a marine engineer named Ebsworth, who wrote to the Board of Trade describing what he called an alarming tendency to roll. He recorded rolls of 45 degrees. Crockery slid off tables. Passengers were thrown from their bunks. Water flooded through portholes that should have been well above the waterline. He wrote that the ship recovered from these rolls slowly, in a labored way that suggested she lacked the stability to right herself in extreme conditions. A first-class passenger named Lund wrote separately that he had never experienced such rolling in 20 years of ocean travel, and that he had been genuinely afraid. The Blue Anchor Line dismissed these concerns. Their architects concluded the ship was within acceptable parameters. The captain, a 69-year-old veteran named Ilbery, who would command her final voyage, said publicly he was satisfied with her seaworthiness. He boarded the Waratah for her second voyage, knowing passengers had complained about her stability. He boarded her anyway. The second and final voyage departed London on April 27, 1909. She called at the Canary Islands, then continued to Adelaide, Melbourne, and Sydney. The outward leg was uneventful. She departed Durban on July 26th, bound for Cape Town. The route followed the South African coast southward, rounding the Cape of Good Hope before heading north into the South Atlantic. It is not a benign stretch of water. The Agulhas Current, one of the strongest ocean currents in the world, runs southwestward along the eastern coast of South Africa at speeds of up to 5 knots. When this current meets southwesterly swells from the Southern Ocean, the result is notoriously dangerous. Rogue waves in this region have been scientifically documented at heights exceeding 30 meters, appearing with little warning in seas that would otherwise seem manageable. But on July 27th, the day the Waratah left Durban, the weather was not extreme. Ships in the same waters that day described conditions as rough but not exceptional. Claude Sawyer was already on a train headed in the opposite direction. At 6 in the morning on July 28th, the SS Clan McIntyre sighted the Waratah near the Bashi River mouth on the eastern Cape coast. The two ships exchanged the standard visual signal. The Waratah signaled that all was well. The Clan McIntyre's captain noted nothing unusual. That was the last confirmed sighting of the SS Waratah by any vessel. Sometime that day, in waters approximately 100 miles northeast of East London, the ship and all 211 people aboard ceased to exist as far as the world was able to determine. Another vessel, the Union Castle liner Guelph, reported seeing a ship matching the Waratah's description later that afternoon, struggling in heavy seas near the Bashi River. The Guelph's crew watched what they believed to be the Waratah labor through large waves. Then the visibility closed in, and they lost sight of her. The sighting was never conclusively confirmed. And then, nothing. The Waratah was expected in Cape Town on July 29th. She did not arrive. The Blue Anchor Line assumed a delay. Heavy weather in July was routine, but by July 30th, no sighting had been reported by any vessel or shore station along the coast. By July 31st, the absence of any signal or communication was no longer explainable. The Blue Anchor Line notified the authorities. The search that followed was the largest maritime rescue operation in South African history to that date. The Royal Navy dispatched HMS Fort and HMS Hermes to sweep the coastline. Merchant vessels were diverted to search assigned grid squares. Shore parties walked the beaches of the Eastern Cape. Lighthouse keepers were ordered to report any debris. The search covered thousands of miles of ocean and coastline over weeks. It found nothing. Not a deck chair, not a piece of railing, not a fragment of the ship's funnel markings. The coast was clean. The Board of Trade inquiry began in December 1910. It lasted 28 days and heard from 83 witnesses. The central question was not simply what happened to the Waratah. It was whether the ship should have been at sea at all. The stability complaints were examined in detail. Multiple expert witnesses testified that the Waratah's metacentric height, the technical measure of a vessel's resistance to rolling, was lower than ideal for a ship of her size. The Blue Anchor Line's experts countered that she had met all regulatory requirements. The inquiry concluded that the Waratah had been seaworthy and properly certificated, and that her loss was most probably caused by an exceptional sea condition that overwhelmed her reduced stability. The Board of Trade formally exonerated the Blue Anchor Line. The Blue Anchor Line went bankrupt within a year. The theory that modern oceanographers find most plausible involves the Agulhas current and the phenomenon now known as rogue waves. In 1909, rogue waves were considered a sailor's legend. Old men at sea described walls of water that appeared without warning from calm seas. Waves 4, 5, or 6 times the height of the surrounding swell that could overwhelm a ship before anyone aboard had time to understand what was happening. For most of the 20th century, marine scientists classified these accounts as exaggeration. The mathematics did not support waves of that scale. Then on January 1, 1995, an instrumented oil platform in the North Sea called the Darayupner platform recorded a single wave with a crest height of 25.6 meters, more than twice the height of the surrounding swell, in conditions that should not have produced anything close to that scale. The Draupner wave was the first instrumentally verified rogue wave in history. It proved that the sailors had been telling the truth. Subsequent research confirmed that the Agulhas current region off South Africa was one of the places on Earth where rogue waves occurred most frequently. The interaction between the southwesterly swell and the fast-moving current created conditions particularly favorable to their formation. The Waratah, a ship with known stability problems, in the Agulhas current zone, in winter seas already described as rough if struck by a rogue wave of sufficient height, would have had very little time and very little chance. A wave of 20 or 25 meters hitting the Waratah broadside could have rolled her past the point of recovery in seconds. She would have gone over. Water would have entered through open portholes and hatches. She would have sunk in minutes, fast enough that no one had time to launch a lifeboat, fast enough that the radio officer never reached his equipment, fast enough that 211 people went from a normal morning on a ship to the bottom of the ocean between one wave and the next. The absence of wreckage has been the detail that resists every explanation. A ship of 9,339 gross tons sinking in coastal waters should have left something. Wooden furniture, life jackets, cargo, the personal effects of 211 passengers. The South African coastline in that area is not remote. If debris had washed ashore, someone would have found it. Nothing was ever identified as coming from the Waratah. The rogue wave theory offers a partial explanation. A ship sunk in the Agulhas current zone might have had its debris carried rapidly away from the coast, dispersed over hundreds of miles of open ocean before it could wash ashore. The current runs fast enough to carry floating debris far into the South Atlantic within days. But wreckage that disperses eventually washes up somewhere. It has been 116 years. Nothing has been found. The searches did not end with the inquiry. In 1955, a South African expedition claimed to have identified a wreck on the ocean floor approximately 100 miles from the Waratah's last known position. The sonar image appeared consistent with her dimensions. Independent analysts later concluded the data was inconclusive. No dive was ever conducted to verify the claim. In 1983, Maritime researcher Clive Cussler announced his team had found an anomaly on the seabed in the area. His team never conclusively confirmed the find. In 1999, a company called Ultramarine conducted a detailed sonar survey and identified an object described as having the approximate dimensions of the Waratah. A subsequent dive found it to be a geological formation. Every search has come back empty. Among the 211 people who sailed on the Waratah's final voyage were families traveling together, couples emigrating to England, children going home after visiting relatives in Australia. There was a family with 3 children, the youngest 4 years old. None of them came home. There was a woman named Minnie Robbins, returning to England to be reunited with her husband after months away. She had sent letters home throughout the voyage. Her husband received them after she was gone, reading words written by a woman who had been dead for weeks before the envelopes arrived. There were 92 crew members, men from Britain, Scandinavia, and a dozen other nations who had signed on for a routine voyage on a flagship they had every reason to believe would bring them home. Their names are recorded. The inquiry preserved them, the crew list, the passenger manifest, the formal documentation of 211 lives that ended in the waters off the Eastern Cape on a July day in 1909. Claude Sawyer testified at the inquiry in December 1910. He described the dream in precise, uncomfortable detail. The figure with the sword, the bloody rag. 3 appearances. 3 times waking in a cold sweat, the inquiry did not know what to do with his testimony. It could not be ignored, because he was present, and the ship was gone, and he was the only passenger who had left. It could not be given weight, because the inquiry was a technical proceeding concerned with stability calculations and wave heights. The inquiry noted his testimony and moved on. Sawyer spent the rest of his life as the man who got off the Waratah. He told the story of the dream many times. He said repeatedly that he did not think of himself as lucky, because luck implies randomness, and he did not believe what had happened to him was random. He died in 1941. He never stopped thinking about the ship. If a ship of the Waratah's size sank in those waters today, she would be found. A black box would transmit her final position. An emergency beacon would broadcast her coordinates to satellites. A voyage data recorder would capture the last minutes of her existence. In 1909, none of those things existed. A ship could sink in a populated shipping lane and leave nothing behind that could be traced back to her. The Waratah left nothing. Not because the technology to find her did not exist, but because the ocean took her so completely and so finally that there was nothing left to find. The Blue Anchor Line, the company whose flagship she was, whose future she was supposed to represent, dissolved shortly after her loss. The line was purchased by White Star, which would itself become infamous 3 years later for the sinking of the Titanic. The Waratah outlasted the company that built her, in the only sense available to her. She became more famous in her absence than she ever was in her brief time on the water. The SS Waratah made one complete voyage and a few hundred miles of a second one. She was in service for less than a year. In that time, she generated stability complaints her owners dismissed, lost a passenger who had a dream, and disappeared so completely that 116 years of searching have not produced a single object that can be definitively linked to her. 211 people. A winter morning off the South African coast, rough but not exceptional weather. A last signal saying all was well. And then the Agulhas current and the Southern Ocean swell, and a stretch of water known to produce waves that the science of 1910 said could not exist. In 1995, the instruments at the Draupner platform recorded the proof. The waves were real. They had always been real. The Waratah had known it first. Somewhere in the waters between the Bashi River and East London, the SS Waratah is resting. 211 people with her. The ocean has kept them for 116 years. It shows no sign of letting go. If you want to hear the stories of what else the sea has taken and never returned, subscribe. There is always another ship that never came home.